I'm going to talk about human rights in the age of populism, and I'm going to try to tie it also to the debate in Israel around the elections. And the claim that I'm going to be making that we are living in an age of populism, and that the age of populism does pose a significant challenge for those who are working on human rights, and that Israel, I think, is part of this challenge, or is confronting parts of the challenge, although, as we will see when we will get to Israel, Israel has some unique features which, like always, which make the analogy to some of the other cases a bit difficult. But let's get there one step at a time. So let's start with human rights and say just a few things about where I see the clash between human rights and populism that I will deal with momentarily. So the human rights movement, and the UN Human Rights Committee is part of that movement, because this is a global body that is entrusted. It's a professional body of experts entrusted with monitoring compliance with human rights. And the reason that you have a global body monitoring human rights is because that human rights after World War II were presented as a universal system, as a universal entitlement that every individual should have protected. And what is unique about those human rights, what makes them special, is that they correlate to very fundamental interests of individuals. And they also correlate to an historical experience of oppression of individuals by their own governments. And we have seen this before World War II in the context of undemocratic governments, authoritarian regimes in Europe. But we have also had a very long experience going all the way to the Magna Carta, that even within countries that have traditions of rights, there is a problem which we call in the literature the tyranny of the majority. Namely, you do have democratic majorities that are willing to provide only limited protections to the rights of marginalized populations, and therefore part of the human rights movement is to monitor authoritarian regimes, but part of it is also to monitor how democratic regimes or democratic governments fare, especially with regard to those marginalized populations for whom the political process doesn't provide an adequate remedy. So on the Human Rights Committee, we often deal with the rights of foreigners, of migrants. We deal with the rights of prisoners. We deal with the rights of minorities. We deal with many countries with the rights of LGBTs. I mean, these are individuals who are not treated equally by the majority. So you could say in that respect that human rights has within it, and this is something that I will return to, has within it a counter-majoritarian streak. So human rights, in a way, are there as a corrective mechanism to address some of the shortcomings of majority-based decision-making. I would argue more broadly that the human rights movement, which has been created at the global level after World War II, was also very much tied to two ideological political projects. One being the project of the liberal democracy that took hold after World War II in many areas of the world, initially in the Western, in the free world, but after the collapse of the Soviet Union in many other areas of the world as well. And that project was a project that saw individuals at the center of the normative universe, and in a way treated states with some degree of apprehension. States could be a sort of protection for individuals, but they could also be a source of threat for individuals. And therefore, the powers of the state had to be curtailed in order to ensure the protection of individuals. And the other big project has been the project of the gradual, and by the way, on the liberal democracy in the early 90s, I mean, you must remember Fukuyama and the End of History book, which claimed that in a way the battle of ideas, the historical battle of ideas has been won Political evolution has reached its final ultimate stage, and now this is only liberal democracy is the only game in town. So this was one strand, and the other strand, I would argue, ideological political strand that we have seen after World War II, and it is related to this skepticism of the state, was the project of internationalism or cosmopolitanism, which basically posited that the state is a useful but only partly useful vehicle for promoting the collective good. And that by and large, I mean, people were thinking that the states, in the 1990s, people were thinking that the institution of the state is on its way out. It's either going to merge upwards with regional organizations such as the EU, or maybe be dissolved or somewhat devolved through more regional forms of government that are closer to the individual. But the project of the state was seen as somewhat parochial and anachronistic project. So, and in a way, the human rights movement was tied, the success of the human rights movement was tied to a large degree with these two other projects, the projects of liberal democracy and internationalism / cosmopolitanism. Now, the claim that I'm making is that the project of political populism is challenging all of the said propositions and all of the said movements, and it is a way pushing history in the opposite direction, bringing back the state, challenging liberal democracy, and challenging the notion of universal entitlement of rights that are protected by independent institutions such as courts. Now, what do I mean when I refer to populism? And this is, of course, a very tricky point because populism is being used all over the place. It's probably the biggest buzzword in 2018 or 19 after maybe fake news. So what is populism? So I'm going to say what I'm not going to deal with and is sometimes qualified with populism. So sometimes we use the term populism to qualify very simplistic messages that have broad appeal because they purport to present simple solutions to complicated problems, or they purport to provide simple explanations for complicated processes. So this is part of what people sometimes refer to as populism. And I would say two things about this, that first, I agree that it is a problem. I think it is a problem that political discourse is using very simplistic terms, is highlighting short-term interest over long-term interest. I agree it is a problem, and I agree it is a bigger problem at the age of social media than it was 10, 20 years ago. Because social media in a way accentuates the ability of spreading populist messages, creates these echo chambers that amplify the power and effect of such messages, and also trains us to have very short attention spans, which makes it almost impossible for us to actually handle complicated arguments, nuanced arguments. So if we have 256 characters in a tweet, and this, of course, has been doubled. It used to be half of that. I think I may have gotten this wrong, but this is around the number of characters you are permitted to use in a tweet. It's very hard to convey complicated ideas such as that government shouldn't treat cruelly prisoners. This is a very complicated and counterintuitive idea. So we are living in an age where that sort of populism is on the rise. But I would say that this is part of politics. I mean, politics is about convincing the masses, is about communicating, and one has to find ways to communicate on all sides of the aisle on all sides of agenda, one has to adapt the messages to the medium. So I'm concerned about this, but I'm not extremely concerned about this. And certainly for the purposes of my talk, I'm not going to dwell more on this. I'm actually, when I deal with political populism, I deal with a somewhat different brand of populism. And here is where I think we have to be, I am more concerned. I don't want to tell you what you have to do. But I think one could be more concerned. And what I refer to as populism is an idea. It's really an idea, an ideological tendency or trend. And I would argue that the center of gravity of political populism is to identify the will of the people as the only sole source of legitimate authority in public life. So everything has to, and this is almost literally what populism is about the people being at the center of legitimacy of decision making. And of course, populist politicians or populist leaders who are those who claim to be the only ones who represent that voice of that people. Now, again, I have to be a little bit more nuanced here. It is a complicated idea. It is difficult to tweet it. So I'll try to explain and illustrate and unpack this argument. The will of the people is a very important feature of democracy. Okay, it's probably the most important feature of democracy. However, democracy, as we traditionally understood it, was built on the idea that constructing decision making only on the basis of the will of the people, and as almost a direct channeling of the will of the people, this is not a good way to go about. So actually what we see in modern liberal democracies is a much more nuanced integration of the will of the people into decision-making processes. So we have, for instance, professional politicians that channel the will of the people, and sometimes they apply their minds instead of the people to some policy issues on which the people have not expressed explicitly their intentions. So we are delegating experts in politicians, to make decisions on our behalf and to express as much as they can the will of the people. And we have checks and balances. We have systems by which we have, for instance, ways to weigh long-term interests against short-term interests. We have ways in which we factor in not only the preferences of the majority, but also the interests of the minority. We do not normally have winner-takes-all kind of decision-making across the board. We do have some areas which are decided by on a partisan basis, but many decisions in political life are taken on a bipartisan or multi-partisan form. We do acknowledge that some decisions should be taken by politicians and other decisions should be taken by experts who are not politically appointed. So we have these very complicated institutions and decision-making processes in society, which in a way moderate, or you could say dilute, the impact of the will on the people on specific policy issues. Now, this is an anathema for political populism, because, as I said, for political populism, there is only one legitimate source of authority, which is the putative will of the people. And how does that manifest itself? So that manifests itself, and this is a claim that was developed by a German scholar called Matthias Kuhn, who is based in Berlin, but also at NYU. And he has made the claim, which I think is an interesting claim, and I largely adhere to that there are four typical moves that you can identify within political populism that in a way derive from the basic premise which I alluded to, that everything has to be related to the will of the people. So the first move is that those institutions that in a way come between the will of the people and their political representatives, and in a way prevent their political representatives from implementing the will of the people, those institutions lack in legitimacy. And they have to be resisted, and they have to be marginalized. So if you have courts, independent courts, that go against the will of the people, do not allow the will of the people to be implemented because of all of these legal technicalities, then they are the enemies of the people. And the same would go for other elitist institutions that almost by definition represent a small elite and not the people as a whole. So that would go for what we call in Israel other gatekeepers. It could be the Attorney General, it could be the State Comptroller, it could be the head of the National Human Rights Commission, and it could even be elitist groups like academia or public intellectual that do not challenge, that actually present an opposition to the will of the people. So this is one area in which we are seeing populists operate, and that is to attack elitist institutions that do not reflect, or in a way structurally are not designed to reflect the will of the people. Secondly, if it is only about the will of the people, anything coming from outside the polity, from international bodies, the UN, the EU, the European Court of Human Rights, what have you, it has zero legitimacy. So the problem is not whether we agree with a particular judgment of the European Court of Human Rights or a decision by the UN Human Rights Committee. The question is whether these bodies have any legitimate claim for telling us what to do. And usually the response of populist movement would be they don't decide for us. So in Orban's Hungary, you have billboards which goes and say the UN does not decide for us on immigration, which is part of how political populism thinks about these issues. The third, and this gets trickier, the third move that you see within populism is that if populism has any hope in reflecting the will of the people, it must assume that the will of the people is relatively monolithic. Namely, that the people actually have, on the key issues, they have a single voice. They are able to speak in a single voice, and therefore, pluralism is the enemy of populism. Because if you have many voices within society, then no one actually could represent the true voice of the people. And what we see as a result is an attempt, again, to delegitimize and to marginalize groups that actually do not follow the common or the dominant narrative in society. So if we're using Orban, who is the poster child of political populism, partly because he admits that he is a populist, and he advocates a system of governance that he calls illiberal democracy. So this is not something that he is ashamed about. This is actually his agenda, being a populist leader. So if we go to Orban, if you are a civil society group that is working on immigration in Hungary against the will of the people to bar immigration, then you're being delegitimized as being really a foreign agent. You are really operating on the part of George Soros, and not because you claim to represent the people, or if you operate in Maduro's Venezuela, to promote, to criticize the government, then you're the agent of the United States. You're being, in a way, alienated. Your motives are being questioned. And you could see the same approach or the same tools applied also vis-a-vis media, vis-a-vis academia, other critical voice political opposition, their loyalty, their sense of belonging, their legitimacy is being questioned. And finally, the fourth and most difficult aspect of populism is that if indeed there is one true voice of the people, then elements within society that do not generate this voice because they're a part of a minority or they have a different religion, so they are in a way structurally not well situated to be part of this common voice, then they're really not part of the people. So we are redefining as populist movements, who are the people? So the people in Hungary are only Christians. This is the people. So if you're not a Christian, you're not part, because this is a Christian nation. So you're not a part of the people. And this is the more difficult and complicated way, but it is really to unpack the state and to go back to a more core and homogeneous group and to associate political legitimacy to the wishes of that group by excluding all other elements in society that do not fit within this group. So this is, in rather abstract terms, what I consider to be political populism. And as I explained, this is cumulatively, political populism represents a direct assault on liberal democracy, because it really, and it is in this respect a revolutionary agenda, because it really argued against this whole delicate, nuanced, time-honed tradition of having checks and balances, having procedures that allocate power within different elements in the political system, and it places all the eggs in one basket, which is the will of the people. Now, I gave a few examples. Maybe I could give a few more and to show how this actually plays out in concrete terms. So again, Hungary and Poland, as you know, one of the major projects of the previous Orban government, but the current one probably doesn't need it anymore because the previous government has succeeded so much, was to dismantle the Constitutional Court of Hungary. And a parallel project has been taking place in Poland. In both cases, the regimes have gone after the courts by changing the constitution, taking away powers from the court, changing the composition of the court, changing the rules for appointing judges on the court, changing the administrative structures of the court, so politicians would have more say on issues such as budgets and even allocation of cases. In the case of Poland, there was even a refusal to publish a decision by the Supreme Court, by the Constitutional Court, that the government opposed to. And this has led the EU, for both countries actually, to start proceedings to take away their voting rights within the EU, because they are no longer meeting the rule of law criteria for EU membership. So this is one area where we have seen very clear attacks on the judiciary. Venezuela is a country which this process has already culminated and the legal system has been destroyed. So we are seeing this as a common feature, both for right-wing populism and also for left-wing populism. This is not a right or left, necessarily a right or left issue. You could have on both sides of the political spectrum. Rejection of internationalism. I think this is something we have seen in many countries, but even in this country, we have seen part of the discussion in recent years that was critical about Europe had to do with decisions of the European Court of Human Rights on issues such as prisoner voting and immigration policy. And whereas part of the criticism was genuine concern about the decisions themselves and their legal basis, part of the concern was on whether judges from Albania or Serbia should be making decisions about the UK. So there were challenges concerning the legitimacy of being subject to international supervision. And this, of course, we have seen much more extreme examples in other places. I can only allude recently to the United States threats against judges from the International Criminal Court. If they dare prosecute American service members, they will face themselves prosecution. In the United States, there has also been the canceling of the visa for the prosecutor of the court as part of this refusal, basically, to accept the authority of international bodies. Civil society, I already mentioned how they're were treated in Hungary. There has been legislation in Russia which regards, and also in Hungary, that requires civil society groups to designate themselves as foreign agents. I alluded before to the fake news issue, but I think Trump's use of the fake news staple to basically deflect criticism by media is part of this move to deal with pluralism by actually dismissing the legitimacy of any criticism. Poland has given us the example of the Polish death camps as basically a criminal law, eventually changed into a civil law, which forbids the use of the term Polish death camps in Poland, because this actually challenges the national narrative that Poles were victims of World War II and that they have no responsibility for the extermination camps that were all on Polish territory. Russia has a crackdown against gay propaganda as another form of stifling of dissent, which upsets the national narrative. We have seen part of the anti-migration policies in places like Hungary and Italy described by some politicians as an attempt to protect the national character of these states from being lost as a result of the flood of those migrants. Now, Israel. How does this actually play out in Israel? So I will say first, preliminary, I will say two things in Israel. I will immediately describe many measures in Israel that have been attempted and have resemblance to many measures that I've described in connection with other countries. So the approach or the tools that we are seeing in other places have been attempted also in Israel. I would say that by and large, so far in Israel, they have not succeeded, which is an important observation, though the fact that they have not succeeded in the past doesn't mean that they will not succeed in the future, perhaps even in the very near future. And I'll say a few words about this with the government after the new elections. I would also say that in Israel, unlike in Hungary, I don't think Mr. Netanyahu is a populist. So I think Mr. Netanyahu is using sometimes, or his allies are using sometimes, populist rhetoric in order actually to push for policies that have very limited support among the population. But the use of populist rhetoric is in a way strategic. It removes certain roadblocks that are in the way of certain political elements. So, for instance, if the Haredi wants to pass a new conscription law that would, for once and for all, relieve all Haredi youngsters from serving in the military, and the one stumbling block which prevents them from doing so is the Supreme Court of Israel, which has repeatedly struck down legislation that gives blanket exemption to Haredi, then by using populist rhetoric against the court to take away the powers of the court, you're opening the door for introduction of this conscription bill, although it is extremely unpopular in Israel. So this is in a way the paradox. You are using part of the rhetoric to actually implement policies that you cannot really claim with a straight face that they have resonance with the large population. So this makes the Israeli example a little bit more complicated, but let me dig a little bit deeper and then say something on the one area where I think there has been some from my end, worrying development. So in the 20th Knesset, that was just that just finished its term 2 weeks ago, we did have a flood of private bills submitted by individual MKs that were trying to introduce elements which I would consider having resemblance to what we see in populist countries. So there have been a flood of bills trying to cut down the powers of the Supreme Court by allowing the Knesset to reintroduce legislation that the Supreme Court has deemed unconstitutional, by taking away from the court powers of judicial review over administrative action, or at least curtailing powers of judicial review, by changing the way in which judges are appointed. So there are some Knesset members who advocate that we would have hearings, confirmation hearings, like you have in the US Senate, for candidates for judicial appointments. And there have been some other attempts in this regard. There have been attempts to cut down on the budget of the Public Broadcasting Authority in Israel, also to subject it to more political type of regulation. There have been attempts to require civil society organizations supported by foreign governments to advertise on their stationery the fact that they are supported by this. There has been legislation passed blocking NGOs that defame the IDF by publishing reports accusing the IDF of committing crimes from entering Israeli schools, etc., etc., etc. By and large, these, as I said, these measures have not succeeded, and even those few measures that were succeeded were significantly watered down, partly because some members of the previous coalition introduced a moderating influence, partly because of the work of Israeli of groups in Israel, such as the Israel Democracy Institute, partly because of criticism in media, etc. I would say that there has been, in terms of the rhetoric, we are seeing more and more clashes between politicians and the media, which does raise some memories of Donald Trump. So you do see Netanyahu going out directly against media criticism by accusing the reporters of being leftist, etc., which is something that we haven't seen before. There was also even a billboard in the last elections by the Likud that had the figures of 4 leading commentators on television under the slogan, "They do not decide for us." So we are seeing some of the playbook is being also applied, but by and large, so far under the 20th Knesset, you could say that there hasn't been a significant change. Where there was a change. So let me say something before getting to the nation-state bill, which is something which I do want to speak about, because this is where I think there has been some change. But I do want to say that maybe what has happened in the 20th Knesset has set the stage for what has not happened in the 20th Knesset will set the stage for what will happen in the 21st Knesset. So the fact that those initiatives have not succeeded in the past does not mean that they will not succeed now. And as those of you who are following the news from Israel know that the new Netanyahu coalition is keen on reintroducing legislation that would cut down the powers of the Supreme Court, especially in connection with the new immunity law that would get Netanyahu off the 3 criminal indictments that he is currently facing. So here you have, again, a combination of a populist rhetoric. The court is too powerful, with a very specific agenda that has very limited support in Israel, and that is that a politician should get an out-of-jail card as long as he is in office. Where I do think that the 20th Knesset has introduced legislation which has, in my view, a populist dimension is the nation state of the Jewish people basic law. Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people basic law that was passed last year. This is a law which essentially doesn't say anything. I mean, it doesn't have, from a lawyerly point of view, it really introduces no new rights and no new obligations. It mostly is a declaratory piece of legislation. So in practical terms, it is really not an important law. It's a law which essentially says that Israel is the state of is a Jewish state. It is the expression of self-determination of the Jewish people. The language is Hebrew. The flag is the star of the blue and white, Star of David. The anthem is Hatikva, etc., etc. I mean, something that you really didn't need. It's not that we didn't know this before, but okay, you want to put it on legislation. This is fine. Where this is, why is this being viewed as? It is viewed as very controversial in Israel, and was a significant item also on the Israeli election. It's not because of what the law has; it is because of what the law lacks. And the most significant concern is with the first section of the law, which does say that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. Full stop. There was a push during the drafting of the law to introduce into this language two qualifiers or two additional ideas that replicate other formulas that we have in other foundational documents. So, for instance, the Declaration of Independence says Israel is a Jewish state, however, all citizens have equal rights. And this time the coalition refused to introduce the language, all citizens have equal rights, in the bill, which was already a very worrying decision. And then in the other basic laws that we have, with the formulation that is used, and this is what every Israeli student studies in school, that Israel is a Jewish and democratic state. And here again, there was resistance by the coalition to introduce the word and democratic. So we have a law which says only it's a Jewish state, no reference to democracy, no reference to equality, no acknowledgement of the fact that there are 20% of the population is not Jewish. There is one area in the law which does talk about Arab group rights, and this is the Arabic language. But there, what the law does is actually demotes Arabic from being an official language of the state to being a language with a special status. So this law, although it was not, again, it has no practical significance, but symbolically it has been viewed as underscoring the centrality of Jewishness in the state of Israel, implying that those who are not Jews are not really a part of this national project. So this was like a finger in the eye of the non-Jewish minority, and there have been demonstrations. The Druze, who have been the most vocal opponents of this, because they say we are serving in the military, we are assuming all responsibilities. It's really, for us, it's really a slap in the face to have this legislation. And I tie this to this idea of redefining who the people are as part of an attempt to gain more legitimacy and to delegitimize those on the other aisle of the political spectrum that are allegedly more sympathetic to, in the Israeli case, to the Arab minority. So I think this is a bill which is part of a populist trend to accentuate the core group at the expense of more inclusive frameworks. So in conclusion, the claim that I am making is that the current political populism environment represent a serious challenge for the human rights movement, because it takes a frontal attack on the values of the human rights movement, which place individuals and not groups at the center. It attacks the institutions of governance that protect individual rights, which are courts and other elements such as media, academia, civil society, and makes it more difficult to protect human rights. And this is a process that, if left unchecked, could further deteriorate and transform countries into countries that operate on the basis of mob mentality. And what is happening in the Philippines with the way drug dealers or suspected drug dealers are treated, I think is an extreme manifestation of this populism and of this group mentality. What it implies, and I think the sad truth that it implies about human rights, is that human rights, although it is a project that has been there at the international level for decades and decades, 70 years, more than we are 71 years after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In many countries, it of course had deeper roots, including in this country. It is apparently not doing very well in communicating its main values, it's communicating its main tenets, and its ability to win hearts and minds and maintain this hold on hearts and minds appears to be very limited. It is more and more viewed as an elitist ploy to control the masses by using high rhetoric. And in this respect, the human rights movement has to reassess its methods, reassess its strategies, and perhaps undertake a more serious process of reform. What can be done? I have no magic bullet, but I could say perhaps there are those who say that human rights have to develop in areas which connect more to the to broader populations, to the have-nots of society. So some are saying human rights have to deal more with social and economic rights so that they are able to provide benefits and become more appealing to large groups in society. I have a lot of respect for this approach, but I would acknowledge that in certain respects, going more in the direction of imposing on the states a certain economic vision and certain social policies could actually exacerbate the tension between majority rule and the human rights movement. So I'm not sure, although I'm a big supporter of economic and social rights, I am not sure that this is the best time actually to be very creative about how to expand existing human rights. I think it's a circling of the wagons kind of period for human rights. Secondly, Natasha talked about politicization. I think politicization is it's always been a serious threat for the human rights movement, but I think at this point in time, it's really a poison pill for human rights, the problem of politicization. So if you recall, the Human Rights Commission was abolished in 2006. The Human Rights Commission was the forerunner for the Human Rights Council. It was abolished because it was perceived at the time to be a liability on the human rights on the United Nations, and the person who has advocated the abolition of the Human Rights Commission was Kofi Annan, the Secretary General, who think that having a commission that is working on human rights, but actually using the language of human rights to promote partisan politics in a very selective and unfair manner, that this creates more harm than good. And I think that we have to reevaluate other existing mechanisms, including the Council. And there is now a process of review of the Council. And I would claim that whereas the Council in some areas is doing important work, and I know many of us have this very negative approach of the Council, but I should say with regard to some countries and some issues, the Council has done actually very important work. In other areas, it has actually failed to live to its own standards, and I think there has to be serious reckoning about what to do with this regard. And I think it is very important for bodies like us to continue functioning as effectively as we can and as professionally as we can to apply human rights law and in a way to resist this trend, which may become stronger and stronger. I don't think it is I certainly think it is I don't think it's a lost fight. I don't think it's a lost cause, and I certainly think it is a fight worth fighting. But at this point in time, I think we have to acknowledge that the challenge before us is probably the most serious challenge that we have seen since 1945 for the human rights movement. So on that unhappy note, I will maybe cede the floor to Natasha and we'll take some questions.